dreams, where the imagination can take anything from your life and transform it into something beautiful or something straight out of a horror movie. If you ask anyone what they dream, you'll get hundreds of different answers, some more absurd than the last. But sometimes you do get consistency when you apply it to the other meaning of the word. Like, if you ask any indie game developer, you'll get a similar answer: to create a game that people will love and made their way. They would hope that it would connect with their audience and hopefully be successful in both a spiritual and commercial sense. Sadly, the indie scene can be a nightmare for many of those developers, as fantastic games throughout the ages, ones that show the best of what the industry has to offer, may not get the eyes on them that they deserve. Today's game may be starting as one of those games, but I'm hoping that this review helped transforms that nightmare into a dreamy bliss, or at least enough to transform the dreams of those who watch it. I'm not going to mince words here. NeverAwake, developed by Neotro Incorporated and published by Phoenix Incorporated, is going to play spoiler for my yearly list of overlooked games of 2022, because it is criminal that at the time of this review, it only has 56 reviews on Steam. It cost $19.99, and it came out on the PC, specifically Steam. It comes out later on the Xbox One, the PS4, the PS5, and Nintendo Switch early next year. You want to know how criminal it is that it has that little of reviews? There. That's my base score for the game. A 98. I'll do my enhancer system later, but any game with this high of a base score in my system, you know that I fell in love with it. It's on the same level as many of the games I praise daily. The Valhalla cyberpunk bartending simulators, the Wonder Songs, the Virgo vs. the Zodiacs. I'm going to tell you why, of course, but I'm warning you now before this review starts. I think going in completely blind, even without the basic mechanics, mind you, is probably the best way to experience the game. But even if you don't, I'm going to convince you by the end of this review to pick it up. I have to. It's that damn good. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from woovit for the purposes of content creation. Granted, I am a little late on this, but you should know from my history that getting a key or not doesn't make a difference for the game's score. But you still should know that because of FTC guidelines. As well as the whole morals thing, you know? So, what is NeverAwake? Well, it's a twin-stick shooter taking place in the mind of a girl who's in a coma. You play as this creature, and while you don't know what he or she represents, you seem to get an idea early what you're fighting. The representation of this girl's mind, her memories, her nightmares, however you want to interpret it. Your job can change over the course of the game, more on that later, but early on, you kill enemies and grab their souls. You complete a level when you fill up your heart meter to 100%. Now, because it's an objective-based task, if you don't grab the number of souls in the first go of a level, that's okay, because the level will loop and change things slightly in cases to help you on that mission. The game will score you based on your attempts, the number of loops, various other criteria to give you a score, and you'll earn some souls to spend on some extras that can help you out later on. Now note, in general, you do want to try to grab as many souls in the first loop as possible, because it does get a little bit harder with every loop afterward. Enemies will sort of pull over from the first loop that you didn't get, and you just want to be a little bit speedy, but not necessarily put yourself in danger. To do that, you have your basic laser projectile, which you fire using your right control stick. For the record, the game does recommend you play with a controller, and that's what I played with. Firing is done automatically on aiming in the direction that you are using the control stick in, and there can be different levels of your base projectile depending on your equipment and other statuses. You also have a special weapon that can be anything from a shotgun blast to a mirrored version of your regular weapon, or even a big area of attack. You have a dash to move around to avoid damage as well, and that's your base loadout. Although, as I will get into, there's a lot of loadout configurations that can change your base health, ammo count, and various other effects to make you play the way you want to play. Now, mouse and keyboard players are going to be fine here. You have the control and aiming that you need to hit enemies and be precise. But I will admit, the game does feel more at home in the controller area. But that's also because I grew up with a controller in my hands. Granted, the mouse aims you in the direction that you want to fire, and you don't have bindable keys. So get used to the fact that your special weapon is on mouse 1, and you just fire in a direction regardless if you're aiming with the mouse, which does have some downsides with certain accessories that the game puts in front of you. Almost immediately, NeverAwake will feel familiar to those who've played the genre, yet at the same time, still different enough to make you pull a rock from a WWF show of the 90s. The whole eyebrow thing. The focus on collecting souls, where if you don't make a beeline to them to grab them before they leave the screen, adds a new layer to this gameplay, especially when the difficulty starts to ramp up. Seeing a set of souls, but knowing that getting across the screen in between bullets does lead to some moments of panic, and forces you to react on the fly, especially in the early game where you have limited health and you don't have some of the enhancers you get while playing through the game. Firing into enemies and dealing with their attacks is something NeverAwake does well from the get-go. Sure, you've got your basic firing patterns here, with clean basic attacks and shotgun attacks coming from enemies at the start, where you use your movement and occasional dodge move to avoid damage appropriately. For those veterans of the genre, note that the eye of the gun is similar to what you'd expect from other games in the genre for your damage area. Yet, I will admit that I actually paid less attention to that in this game than many others, and that really has to do with the fact of how seamless the attacks and spacing in this game were. Something about the game's use of its level design space and bullet patterns, along with our main guy, gave enough space to move around and avoid bullets, even when the game started throwing everything and the kitchen sink at you. Something inherent about this game design in conjunction with its presentation always made me feel that even without focusing on that true damage dot, I didn't question when I got hit or when I avoided hits in general. The game just surprisingly gave that information inherently to me without me thinking about it. I actually can't think of a shmup that was this good at that, and that's sort of surprising to me. The controls feel refined in terms of speed and movement as a whole, and quick to respond in terms of dodging and attacking without being overly helpful when you put yourself into a corner. The game understood that certain mistakes were more costly than others as well, and would punish them appropriately. Like, taking a bullet and getting hit, yeah, you'd take a damage hit, and certain cases, that's a lot of damage to take. But in the later levels, if you get stuck behind something because you didn't move when you were obviously supposed to, and you get squished on the screen, the game wouldn't kill you, it would just take a lot of health from you. And I actually really liked that. It added to the gameplay in several cases, where I would purposely take damage so I'd get invincibility frames so I could dodge myself out of a situation that I might have been squished in. I'm also very impressed that despite the game being 90 levels and a twin-stick shooter, there is a shit ton of variety here, especially after the first introduction of the game. The game not only does a good job of mixing up enemy design and bullet patterns, level design, and general situations that you have to run into, but it will also pull out new mechanics just when you think the game is done with adding something new, and that's on multiple levels. Think that umbrella that you bought as an accessory to guard your front will protect you against all damage? Well, here comes some piercing lasers with different designs that will force you to rethink that assumption. Being overly reckless and moving on the edges of the screen to try to kill enemies a lot more quickly and finish levels sooner? Well, the game's natural progression will then probably introduce a level that starts spawning more hefty enemies that will damage you reasonably when you're on the edge of the screen, forcing you to be a little bit more conservative, or now you're stuck in a hole where you can't get out of it and it's your own fault. Now, some of the mechanics get introduced and don't have your typical introduction with them, like a specific section that shows you that bullets pierce through umbrellas, for example. And some people may have problems with the fact that you sort of learn through failure in several of the cases in this game. That happens a lot in this genre, but the thing is, it plays into the game's replayability to a certain extent, and the game does as much as it can to show you, even if you don't get it right away, how certain elements behave. So I understand that, but I don't think it's that bad against the game in terms of a detriment. In addition, the game's level design is always pulling out new things from level to level. Sometimes it's an open area, sometimes it's a constrained and claustrophobic arena where enemies may dart in and out and causing you to run into something else in panic. It'll introduce boxes that you can't destroy, but you have to push them away, but those boxes may be needed to avoid infinite lasers so you don't keep taking damage. The game doesn't let you sink in and be comfortable in one type of gameplay from level to level, and it's the game's best feature. None of these levels, even the more obscure and out there ones, are not fun to me. Everything is worth replaying here. This is especially true when it plays with concepts that have been established. You'll have souls that you'll have to pick up on the field when you're racing around a track, or you'll have to even avoid souls in order to get further in the loops to find secrets. The pacing of both the mechanics and the difficulty is fantastic, and what's special here is that I believe it applies to all players in this case. The progression will work for more than just veterans like me of the genre. Part of that has to do with the equipment system, which gives you extra bonuses that can help shore up limitations in your game, or help you with specific objectives you're trying to reach. Of course, there's the basic things like powering up your main weapon, or giving you more health. But then you get ones that'll give you more special weapons once you reach a certain Souls checkpoint, or extending invincibility time so that you can get through things a little bit nicer or a little bit easier. What the game also does well is the fact that if you keep on failing a level, it seems to unlock better equipment that you may need for helping you with attempts against certain levels. Maybe a specific one, or maybe more accessory slots to power you up a little bit more. It also has this sort of overcharge mode where you pay some of your souls to make you a little bit stronger and a little bit more healthy to get you through some of those more panic-inducing levels, which plays into the fact that replaying other levels to get some of those souls would also be worth your while. The difficulty curve in this sense feels right. I found that even as a veteran of the genre, the later levels would have me living by the skin of my teeth, and then I'd adjust and be good for a level or two before running into some more issues. But the way I see it, and the way the game is played, is that even newer players with different loadouts to help them with a similar difficulty spike will find that the game sort of plays the same way for them, if that is to be believed. Maybe they won't necessarily score as high as some of the best, but they'll enjoy themselves and have fun, which this game does fantastically even beyond the presentation and story. This game seems to have everybody in mind from what I see, and while this is coming from a perspective of somebody who's played a lot of games, I'm just sort of in awe of how well this game could play for everyone, even though I don't necessarily have evidence to back it up in certain cases. Oh, did I mention the boss fights? I know you're paying attention now, J Reviews. All bosses fight differently and force you to find the weakness/gimmick while avoiding all the different attacks they will bring at you, and they will introduce new attacks that you haven't seen before that will make you think, okay, how do I avoid it, or how do I deal with this type of movement pattern? They feel like challenges with multi-stage elements and increasing difficulty, and were the highlight of the game a lot of the time. Look, I could go on and on about the gameplay design here, how it feels so familiar, yet different in the genre, and how even things like the special objectives to earn story elements force you to look at your equipment and adapt appropriately. But the gameplay works well in conjunction with everything else in the game in the synergy, and I need to move this review along as it's already at the 15-minute mark. So let's move on and talk about the visual presentation as a whole here, which is masterful in my opinion. Look, we've seen interpretation of dreams and of objects in things such as Alice in Wonderland with the personification element, but NeverAwake's characterization of the fears and thoughts of this little girl and how realistic yet haunting these designs are, this is just absolutely top-notch in my opinion. These designs are not only fun and interesting and have layers to them in terms of how they are characterized, but it's how they feel so realistic to the fears of a young child that really sells this game and its overall atmosphere. Take this weird-ass cat boss. The idea of this ever-shifting cat feeling like an amalgamation of a black cat with an amoeba, like it's everywhere yet nowhere at the same time. I could see how a little girl would come to the conclusion with a cat's typical behavior. But it goes further than that. It's the fact that you get things like the fur with this presentation. The highly detailed fur that contrasts with the lines of the rain, shimmering as it moves and makes me itch just looking at it. Okay, I'm allergic to cats, so this one may be a little bit more impactful to me, but just look at it. The world is just filled with the vision of a child who's lived in a world of imagination, and I can't get enough of it. The wiener dog that's stitched together to make it extra long, like it can't stop growing and keeps being added to. The dog boss with so many eyes, representing that he can see you anywhere, and he's staring you down like a freshly seasoned steak. The mobile phone that literally fires text, likes, and other social media at you in bullet patterns that actually make a lot of sense, but it'll never stop, and it feels like a blessing and a curse with the phone at the same time. We've seen this in other games in the genre, the strange imagery that especially seems present in Japanese shmups. But what really sets this game apart in my mind is the connection to our little girl that we are in the imagination of. But what takes it to the next level is how it contextualizes it in the eyes of the game's story as well. Things connect from one world to another in this game so well as well. You see the claw marks in the background of a level, and realize that that cat or dog that you face probably had something to do with it in the next level. You see photos of the family that the girl is a part of, and how it feels a little twisted how it barely presents at certain points. Like it's there, but she can't fully remember exactly how it's supposed to look. Lighting here is particularly used well, especially from world to world. The glow of the neon of your bullets or from the base of your character can give more detail in more darker worlds and expose new truths, almost lighting nightmares in the darkness. It adds to the nightmare landscape of the game, but you're also never fighting to see anything regardless of the level in terms of the actual gameplay, at least if you don't hyper-focus on things because of the haunting imagery. But one thing that the game does masterfully here was add imagery that was more nice and not necessarily evil to the proceedings as well, to help show that this girl still has horrors in her life that may not necessarily be wrong. Her sister being the prime example. How in this game, she's almost this angel-like figure in a boss fight, very distinct from others that you fought, and how her imagery actually shows that our main character likes her, that you're fighting her maybe because of jealousy of what she represents, or there's 100 ways of interpreting it. And I love the fact that you can interpret this game in so many different ways in the mind of this child, and how it can change as you gain more knowledge of exactly who this child is. The visuals are so fantastic that they sort of, in the process, make the sound design and music seem, well, not bad, but sort of on a normal level, because they aren't godlike like the drawing and character designs are. Like, take the sound design for example. From a gameplay perspective, the sound design here is effective, giving you appropriate sounds for hitting enemies, doing damage and taking damage, and indicators such as getting 33% or 66% souls. You can get some good sounds that will immerse you, like the bark of a small dog turning into the rabid one coming after you. And it's not like the sound design here is bad, like I said, but when the bar for the visuals was raised so high, I was expecting a little bit more whimsy in some of the sound design, and especially noticed the lack of sound with certain enemies that didn't feel as nightmarish like it should. Just take a listen to some examples and hear what I'm talking about. Music, on the other hand, falls a lot closer to the visuals than the sound design, but just not making it to the godlike status. There are haunting melodies that you'd expect with the themes of the game, and the game does a great job of characterizing the music with the stages in question. Like how the use of xylophones and bell tones in the hospital feels like it's being a theme for the doctors and nurses who are stalking in the background. There are some standout themes in terms of beats as well that really highlight the action when it ramps up. And while yes, you could listen to other things while playing the game and be perfectly fine, especially in the first run, I would advise heavily against it, as it does a very good job of characterizing the story and putting you in a place to really take it in. And the fact is, a good amount of this music would be great to listen to while you're coding at work. Well, at least it will be for me. The ending theme hit home to me as well, even though it is basically a Japanese song. Take a listen and hear what I'm talking about. Well, minus the ending theme because, well, spoilers of sorta, really. Now, a lot of you have probably seen the game up to this point and said, yeah, looks absolutely like a bunch of fun, and I'll probably pick it up. At least I'm hoping that's the case. But you're also probably saying, but is it really a masterful gem like you say? What really distinguishes NeverAwake from other games in the genre? And while I could point to you its different gameplay styles and its presentation, it's the story experience in conjunction with the aforementioned presentation and gameplay that takes NeverAwake to that elite tier. I have never played a top-down shooter, a shmup, a bullet hell game that did a better job of not only incorporating the story elements into the DNA of the gameplay itself, but also told a story that was layered, interesting, and actually makes me think a lot about it after the experience was over. Can I say that there's not another game like NeverAwake out there? No, there may be a game or two I haven't experienced that could be, but for me, it sticks out so much that it feels revolutionary. Beyond the characterization and presentation that I mentioned before, between levels you will get a little diary segment from our main character, which is told on specific dates, and really out of order in terms of the overall progression of the game. It'll be all over the place. These story elements shine light on some of the characterization you may see during a level, like describing how the character was chased by a dog and it scared her, or how it literally calls me out about how I don't like vegetables like our main character does. This may seem just like a little story to pull the game along to say it has one, but what it does is add fuel to the fire of your imagination. Anyone who loves detective-like games or mysteries as a whole will love trying to figure out what our character's life was like, what she loved, how her parents were, why she loves her grandma so much. It's the kind of game that I would give to any creative person and just want to see what happens in their head, because it provides such an interesting blank slate that's still grounded with specific information, but plays into the themes of dreams and the coma the girl is in. It also knows to tie specific information back through the process, recontextualizing certain elements and making you face those assumptions that you made earlier in the game, which I love. I love seeing how the growth of our character happened, like how she started to eat a couple of vegetables thanks to some melted cheese, how learning about her mom and dad and how they got along, and how certain bosses are literally fighting each other during their fight, and how it masterfully presents that information to you well before you realize what it means. I went back through all the footage of this game upon completing it to divide up the moments to place in this review, and I cannot count the number of times I found new interesting elements in the background or storytelling that I missed the first time around. Hell, I'll probably buy the game on the Switch and play it again nightly just because I want to experience more and find more. This is the detective wet dream. Even things like who we are playing as, are we really helping this little girl, gets played with during the time of completion, and it opens a very interesting world beyond just this one story that I really, really want to see more of. It does have multiple endings, and even those endings, especially the second one, still throws me for a loop in ways that make sense in the context of the game, and yet I never would have seen coming. And this is coming from someone who could usually see these things coming in those games. I have a little bit of history with it. It caught me so off guard, and I couldn't be happier for it. In the end, NeverAwake is a masterpiece. It's a painting that Just Stop Oil would throw mashed potatoes on because it'd get them attention because of its beauty. Its gameplay is among the best in the genre, while still having elements unique that sets it apart, allowing for multiple ways to play and really taking action to the next level. It's visual design that deserves to have a TV series made of it just so that I can experience it more. It's a story that weaves such a tale that is unique to the player that's playing it that I can't think of many other games that can pull that off effectively, especially in this genre. But most importantly, more than anything else, it uses all those segments in conjunction with itself to pull the entire experience to the mountaintop of fantastic games. Everything helps the next. And really, all the negatives I could possibly say about the game, things like how I do wish there were bindable keys, for example, just pale in comparison to the end product. It scores a 98 out of 100. It's a must-buy, and considering it's on most platforms, there is no excuse not to get it. No excuse. Hell, that doesn't even take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements in games and tries to match the game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability range for you. Now, as you can see, there are not many configurations in which a player shouldn't buy the game immediately, let alone at some point. Hell, unless if you have no soul, you really need to get this game. And yes, my scoring system can go over 100. This is a buyability rating score. 90 and plus means that you should buy it at full price. And right now, even if you're hurting for cash, because it's that great of an experience. So if I say it's 90 or 100, yeah, they both mean the same thing. But if it's 100, that means you should do it even more. The fact of the matter is this. I don't think this game is going to be a sales success. It's not because of its quality. Hell, it's definitely not because of its quality, but because it won't get the eyes on it that it really deserves. The funny thing is, it's got an interesting trailer, it's got interesting art, and it got overlooked on the actual, release of the game. And even a review like this, even if this review does well, which I doubt it will, it's several weeks after the game came out, the fact of the matter is, this game is the prime example of what I want to see from gaming as a whole. Doing something interesting, something new, something familiar, learning from mistakes and others from the past, but trying to make an experience that is transcendent. It is, I don't want to say it's the Mona Lisa of gaming, but it feels like the Mona Lisa of gaming, and it's probably a lot better than that because the Mona Lisa isn't that great to begin with. Okay, maybe that's controversial, but regardless, it is the prime example of what a young studio with talented people could do, and I know that despite that, it's probably not going to get the sales that it deserves, and I really hope that doesn't mean that the developers for this game don't get another chance, because goddamn, if anyone deserves a second chance in terms of making a successful game, and yes, maybe the game will get some sales. Maybe this review will blow up and people will be like, oh, maybe we should take a look at this game. Maybe a bigger YouTuber will see it and be like, oh, let me try the game, and then it blows up somehow. But it really shouldn't be like that. Quality should be the biggest quantifier of a game's success. And if any game deserves the success, it's this one. Anyway, on that down note, thank you for watching. If you've gotten this far in the video, well, I appreciate it. I mean, we're almost at the 34-minute mark, and I would love to hear some feedback about this review. I mean, did I do a good job of selling you on the game? Did I go a little bit too much in detail in certain points? Leave those comments in the comment section below. If you want to see more reviews like this, hit that subscribe button. You could also go follow me over on Twitch, where I do indie streams of games that you probably haven't heard of, and maybe a couple that you have, 2 to 3 times a week, usually focusing on new games that you probably haven't heard of. Anyway, The next review on this channel will most likely be, can't confirm, Lovecraft Untold Stories 2 or Bayonetta 3, depending on what I feel more comfortable with first. My parents are coming towards the end of November, so I will be preparing for that. And I do have a wedding and other things to, plan for. So I'm going to do my best. But for now, this is Dragnix signing out. And as always, keep on gaming. And play NeverAwake. For the love of God, play NeverAwake.